Hey, David Brewster here with a new series. This is Breaking Chords, and this series is going to focus on arpeggios. And I know for me personally, arpeggios are like one of my favorite elements in music. And if you know me, or you've taken lessons from me, or we've jammed, or kind of hung out and talked about guitar, um, I've confessed this for decades. I love arpeggios. They appear in all different styles of music, whether it's rock or classical or jazz or country. You hear them everywhere. And, I knew I was going to be hitting this series sooner or later. And chord play mainly is kind of focusing on introducing, different chords or just kind of sharing, some kind of chord ideas and chord, habits, from popular guitarists. And I'm going to do a similar thing with this. But I am going to input some of my personal ideas and my own lessons and material related to arpeggios. And really, if I go through my library and my, filing cabinet and my archives of all this music, I have a lot of arpeggio-based, exercises, lessons, material. It's one of my favorite things, so we're going to look at all sorts of things, as this series unfolds. We'll get into string skipping and sweeping and tapping and all that good stuff. But we have to start somewhere, and I have already had some questions from viewers and some friends and students asking about arpeggios. Can you talk about arpeggios or demonstrate and unravel some of this mystery? So here we go. Okay, just to make sure we start this series on the right foot and kind of get everybody on the same page before we just dive in. I do have to talk about what arpeggios are. And I know when I first heard the term, I didn't really understand what it was. It sounded very Italian. I thought, is this like pasta or something? What's an arpeggio? Had no idea. The notes of a chord played separately. And that image I just shared, Van Halen kind of nicknamed them broken chords. And just ignore the Olive Garden joke. That was literally a joke. But arpeggios aren't a joke. They're very, very useful. You'll find them in every style of music, rock, country, and classical, and jazz, and metal, and all sorts of, different places. And, when I first heard the term, the notes of a chord played separately, I thought they were just talking about this, like picking through a chord. Which technically those are arpeggios, but that's not the type of arpeggio we're going to be talking about in this series. We're talking about melodic, musical melodic arpeggios that you'll find in guitar solos and fills and licks. And I know this is an area that I'm very excited about arpeggios. I love arpeggios. It's one of my favorite things, in music. I mean, this is kind of a confusing area of music because you're taking something, known as a chord, but then you're doing something with those notes, in a different way. So we're not really picking through these, and we're not really strumming, like a chord. We're literally spelling out, the notes of a chord, or a chord formula, or a chord spelling in a melodic, kind of one note at a time way. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this on the guitar. We can use like sweep, arpeggio patterns. We can string skip. We can tap. You can slide, between notes and kind of spell out arpeggios. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this. So to keep things nice and simple, let's just choose a key, and then we're going to talk about, that particular arpeggio. So I'm going to choose E minor. E minor is a very, very common and popular key on guitar. And we're just going to basically take the little triad, like the little three-note triad that builds an E minor chord or an E minor arpeggio. So in the key of E minor, those three notes would be the root, the flat third, and the fifth, or E, G, and B. And we can find those three notes kind of lined up right there, the 9th fret, 8th fret, and 7th fret on the G, B, and high E string. Now when I hear that type of arpeggio, the first thing I hear in my head, of course I'm pretty random in the head, but I hear, Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, so bring your cowbell. But I hear the interlude from Don't Fear the Reaper. right? And that's technically an arpeggio. You know, we're playing those three notes separately. And the second shape there, you know, the chord changed a little bit. That would be like an E sus2 flat 5. You know, the root note's staying the same, but that that minor third and the fifth is moving to the second and the flat 5 there. Now, the first thing I would recommend, you know, because you can see this shape, but since we're changing strings and moving, you know, between different frets, it might be kind of, you know, visually hard to see what we just did there. So let's refigure that in a different way. Let's just kind of finger it differently. So instead of this, let's just think of like an old school like Van Halen tapping lick, all right? And there's E, there's G, and we're gonna tap the 12th fret on the B, and there's the same three notes. Right? There's E, G, B, E, G, B. Exact same thing. Now, if you really want to be crafty, we could modify that tapping pattern to kind of mimic Don't Fear the Reaper. But there, you know, we're just basically taking that little three-note pattern and transferring it to a single string. But right there, you can plainly see, you know, the distance between the notes and the spelling. Right? E, G, and B. Okay, so that's a basic E minor arpeggio right there. So let's transpose that and kind of find it in different positions, right? So E, G, and B, we could find, you know, 2 octaves lower right here. Right? There's the E, G, and B. And we could do it again like that, or we could do it like this. Same notes, just, you know, kind of played differently. And then that could bring us all the way up to this again. And you could refinger that a couple different ways. You can kind of do a finger roll, you know, and kind of grab that B note there on the 12th fret on the B string. And you can put those three notes on one string there on the low E. You know, so you can find that little three-note triad all over the fretboard, everywhere. As we kind of move forward with this kind of mode of thinking or this train of thought, think of, you know, relate what we're doing to actual chords. You know, think of an E minor chord. And if you're familiar with chord construction, you know, think of what happens when we change that to E major. You know, we're going to change that G natural to a G sharp, right? And we can reflect that, you know, with any of these things that we just uncovered already. Like take the Van Halen tapping lick. You know, there's G natural right there with your pinky. Let's raise that up to G sharp, and that magically transforms that to E major. Right? So there's E major. If you think of that little three-note cluster right there, that basically comes from, you know, an E minor bar chord right there. You can kind of see those three notes hiding, you know, right in the middle of that bar chord or at the top of that bar chord. So right there in that E minor bar chord shape, you know, if we add a G right here and spell out those notes, you can even kind of stretch up and grab that E note, and that would be a 2-octave, you know, E minor arpeggio. Right? Really common, kind of traditional, you know, shape. And that's going to give you, you know, kind of an extended version of this chord played as an arpeggio. If we start converting that chord, let's change, you know, E minor to E minor 7. Okay? And we're going to basically add a D note. Now we could find that, you know, if we kind of stick with this tapped kind of Van Halen style of, you know, arpeggio playing, we could come across that D a couple different ways. You know, we could slide to it. You know, we could tap the same three-note pattern, and with your index finger, just kind of shift back and grab D there on the 3rd fret on the B string, you know, like this. Or we could also, you know, tap that note. And there I'm just basically adding that D on the 15th fret on the B. So if we basically take that 3-note arpeggio we started with, raise the G to G sharp to make it, E major, and then we also keep that D note that we were tapping with there, then that would be an E7 or E dominant 7 arpeggio. You can kind of hear that little, modification there. Now if we basically change that D to a D sharp, then that's going to change it to an E major 7 arpeggio. But I really like, kind of showing and teaching, students this kind of single string approach, because you can clearly see the notes we're using, the notes we're modifying. You can see, something going up or down a half step, and it gives you kind of a clearer picture or visual of what we're doing. Okay, so far we've just basically uncovered, E minor. We converted that to E major by raising the 3rd. We also located the 3, 7th chords, minor 7, dominant 7, and major 7, right? So, you could literally find arpeggios for any chord, any chord that you've ever learned or heard in a song. You can find kind of an arpeggio equivalent. And I'm just going to select a chord that's popped up a lot in chord play episodes. This E minor 9. That E minor 9's appeared in a ton of, songs. Pink Floyd and, Metallica. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that features this chord. And I just kind of picked that one mainly because it's popped up so frequently in chord play episodes. So that's a very famous and popular chord. And it has a really good sound to it. But you could basically adapt that to an arpeggio if you wanted to. And just look at the notes. We've got, E, B, F sharp, G, B, and E. Okay, so we can basically take like an E minor arpeggio and basically add an F sharp, and that would kind of create, an E minor 9 arpeggio, which I really like the sound of that arpeggio. The tonality is really cool. This is just the first installment of Breaking Chords, so we're going to dive much, much deeper. And I have a lot of arpeggio, lessons, material, and ideas that I've uncovered over the years. So I'm going to share, some of that in the series, and we're gonna get crazy with arpeggios. This is just the first step. So hopefully you weren't hoping like for Gambale or just some crazy arpeggio action, on the first episode. We'll get there, but we're going to take one step at a time. So the main thing, I guess, if some of this is new to you, kind of thinking about the notes of chords and kind of spelling them out as arpeggios, or arranging, arpeggios in different ways on the guitar, this is a really beneficial area to study, because it's going to expose, how useful arpeggios actually are. And it's going to change the way you play. Instead of always running scales, you can run scaled ideas and arpeggio ideas, side by side or together, and mix things up, and it creates, a lot of melodic and harmonic interest, when you do that. So leave some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it. Thank you.